We actually raised about $20 million to date now. So the funding announcement was for 19, but we raised another $1 million. So the first round we raised, or the first like tranche of funding, Sam Altman co-led with Lockie Groom, who's actually like a really incredible solo capitalist. So it was Sam and Lockie, and then a whole bunch of like angels and CEO like Parker Conrad from Rippling, Dylan Field from Figma, crypto, Dan Ramiro and Mark Bagava, who were both Zach Abrams, all like former executives at Coinbase.
This content is brought to you by Uphold, which is a great crypto platform that I've been using since 2018. Uphold has all the top cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin and all the altcoins. In fact, they have 260 plus cryptocurrencies on their platform. You can also trade precious metals, stable coins, and 37 fiat currencies. In addition, they are available in over 150 countries. And this platform is fully reserved. They do audits, so you can trust that your funds are safe, no commingling, no lending out your funds. If you'd like to learn more about Uphold, please visit the link in the description. Welcome to the Thinking Crypto podcast, your home for cryptocurrency news and interviews. With me today is Zac Townsend, who's the CEO of Meanwhile. Zac, it is great to have you on.
Really happy to be here. Thank you.
Zac, Meanwhile is building some incredible Bitcoin products. I'm excited to speak to you and learn more about those products. But before we get there, tell us about your background, where you're from, and what's your professional background as well.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town in New Jersey, no joke, called Neptune. So I guess I can say I'm from Neptune. My dad was a postman. My mother was a waitress. I grew up pretty working class, and I tested into this fancy high school that you could think of as like, if all the AV nerds in a whole county had their own high school, that would be the high school I went to. It's called the Communications High School. Um, Went on to get into a fancy Ivy League school, and then really made my way in deep concern around like, I grew up pretty working class. I went to college, and I was like, wow, there were some really rich people in this world, and why is that? And through that, I got really interested in like issues of financial inclusion and financial empowerment. So I ended up working for Cory Booker when he was the mayor of Newark, New Jersey. And I was the head of innovation, which meant all sorts of, like, I just worked on all sorts of things. But one of the things I worked on was financial inclusion and financial empowerment. So I spent a lot of time in West Newark, like, why don't people have bank accounts? Like, why do they do check cashing? Like payday lending, all this stuff. So when Cory decided to run for Senate, I was like, I don't really care about the Senate at all. So I really just wanted to work on fintech. I thought that was like where it was at. So I I was in my 20s. I just got up and moved. I got a job at Stripe as like employee 36 or something. And I got out there, and basically I had all these ideas, and in what is the best like life decision I ever made, but the worst financial decision I ever made, I applied to and got into YC, Y Combinator, like 3 or 4 months into working at Stripe. And then I built this company called Standard Treasury, which built like low-level banking APIs. And this is like when I first got to know a little bit about Bitcoin. So this is like 2013, 14, 15. It was sort of in the background. And then I really engaged with it because we ended up selling this company to Silicon Valley Bank, but we had offers from Dropbox and Airbnb and Coinbase. So probably should have sold the company to Coinbase, but we got to like keep running the product at SVB, so that's why we did it. And selling to a bank was pretty unusual. But so I received my first like Bitcoin in life, like from Brian Armstrong, when he was trying to buy my company and was trying to explain like the value of Bitcoin. And for me, my professional career like I worked at other tech companies. I did another stint in government. Um, I worked at a big consulting firm, and uh, Bitcoin was sort of like underneath that for me. I was accumulating my stack in a dollar cost average way, which is what I recommend people do. And just buying like $100 a week every week for years and years. And then when decided to start this company, my co-founder and I, we sort of were sitting down and we decided we wanted to build something in the Bitcoin ecosystem. And partially we decided that because, we really believe in Bitcoin. And partially we decided like this was late 2021, early 2022. And we were like, hey, we really know regulatory stuff. And that's a particular pain that we're willing to deal with. And we think that all the value or a lot of the value in crypto over the next 10, 20 years is going to come, or Bitcoin is going to come to people who can deal with all the regulatory BS.
Sure.
So we thought that was a real competitive advantage or comparative advantage for us. And so we like sat down and we were thinking of all sorts of different things. And then we like came up with this company.
That's fascinating and such an interesting story that Coinbase, Silicon Valley Bank, and all these folks tried to acquire the company. So was that technology conducive to more of the TradFi payment rails, not so much crypto, but can it be used?
Yeah, that's right. So we now it would be called banking as a service. We sort of invented that category, or bank account as a service. So we like wrapped banks and then fintechs could build on top of us. So we were like this API layer. Coinbase wanted to buy us not really to acquire our like code base, but I think, at the time they were also only like 40 or 50 people. And like we knew a lot about payments operations. We knew a lot about like know your customer and anti-money laundering. Like that was like stuff we had to work on to build this infrastructure. And I think at that moment, again, this is like 2015, they had already had a good bit of success, I think, is like the upstanding regulated, upstart out of YC in 2012, I think. But they saw that like our team, could add a lot to what they were doing. And I think for us, our team was somewhat split on how much they believed in crypto at the time.
Oh, sure. So tell us about Meanwhile, and was the company built to essentially support Bitcoin, or is it beyond that? Is there other services and it incorporates Bitcoin now?
Yeah. Let me start with like where Meanwhile came from. So the story I just told, we were sitting there thinking about regulated financial services, and we had, separately thought about life insurance, and like we were thinking about payments, and we were thinking about all these different things. And I think that our mental model of the whole thing is that if you look out 20, 30, 40 years from now, we believe that there's going to be like crypto land. There's going to be like, you can almost think of it as like a decentralized country. I don't want to sound too like network state apology, but like fundamentally, like we think that there'll be this like overlay on the current global economy, which is like crypto land. And we think of it, and I think it actually like helps mental models to think of it like as a country. It's going to be a country. And that means that it's going to have a currency. And it also means that it's going to have financial institutions. And we can call we think, you can call those TradFi financial institutions, but like we think they'll be like crypto native companies for this like crypto land. And that is how we conceptualize like building a life insurance company. So big economies have life insurance companies, and they have life insurance companies for really like two reasons. Like one is there's this core financial service. So like I know we all think of life insurance as like a combo of like boring and potentially sleazy. Like it's those two
Yeah.
things together. But fundamentally, like life insurance is all about like what happens to my family if I die before I'm supposed to,
Yeah.
or how do I like save for the long term? And actually, annuities, which are the other thing that life insurance companies do, that's all about like what happens to my family if I live longer than I'm supposed to. And these are like pretty core things. Like actually, like one of the oldest, if not the oldest savings product in the world is burial insurance. So like
Mm.
Venetian soldiers would like, or sailors would get on boats and they'd go off and then they'd buy burial insurance, right? Because their families couldn't afford to bury them. So it was like it's a savings mechanism, it's a protection mechanism. So this is like pretty core financial service. So that's like one thing that we think that like crypto land needs. The other thing, which will eventually get to the credit fund, is life insurance companies are like permanent capital.
Mm.
They make investments for the long term because they themselves as institutions and their folks are sorry, their users are thinking in the long term. So much of the like physical world around us, like infrastructure, buildings, mortgages, are owned by life insurers because they're the ones that can think in 10, 20, 30-year timeframes. And we thought that both of these things are like exactly what crypto needs. It like needs core financial services and thinking of it like a currency, and it needs institutions that are like genuinely built to think for the long term and aren't. So I get at like maybe you'll ask me whenever I go on a podcast or I go on CoinDesk TV or whatever. They're like, okay, what do you think is going to happen to the price of Bitcoin like this week? And I'm like, I don't know. And partially the reality of me not knowing is that I've built an entire company, so I don't have to care. Like the question is like, what is Bitcoin going to be at, or what is the value of Bitcoin going to be in 30 years? And I think we can all agree that Bitcoin is going to be up. It's going to be worth more, and it's going to like be part of more economic activity. So I'm not actually sure I answered your question of what meanwhile is, but I'll let you ask another question.
Oh yeah, sure. So let's say I'm a Bitcoin holder, right? There's Bitcoin I want to leave for my daughter. Like it's on a hardware
Yeah.
wallet. I'm never selling it. She's gonna get it, right? Um, Tell me how, with Meanwhile's plans and so forth, how I can benefit more from that or have her benefit more from
Yeah, yeah.
that.
Yeah, fundamentally, I guess you let me describe the product we have and then why people buy it, and then also why I don't think you should take your hold everything in your holder wallet and give it to us.
Mm.
So the Meanwhile is a company, is entirely to not or we have a subsidiary in Bermuda. We should talk more about Bermuda, not the Bahamas. So Bermuda is like a legit jurisdiction. It's where like tons of insurance companies are. Like Chubb's headquartered there. Like it's a real place. Very, very good regulator, very tough. Um, anyway, and our company is entirely denominated in Bitcoin. So what that means is we take premiums in Bitcoin, we pay claims in Bitcoin, and everything in between is in Bitcoin. So we do our like financials in Bitcoin, we do our solvency calculations in Bitcoin, we do our reserves in Bitcoin, we make our investments in Bitcoin. Everything's in Bitcoin. So that's back to the like notion of not being concerned about the price. So you could sort of think if our balance sheet just stays the same. The price of Bitcoin over me running this company has been at 65, it's been at 15, now it's at 43,993. And that, but like our assets and our liabilities have stayed this. I mean, they're growing, but they've like stayed the same and they're matched. So we're truly like a Bitcoin native company in that way. And then our product is called Whole Life.
Mm.
So it lasts your whole life. In that way, I don't hope I'm not the bearer of bad news, but you're eventually going to die. I hope that's 50, 60, 70 years from now. And so there will eventually be a payout for your daughter, no matter what. So in that way, it's more like a savings or an investment product. Although there is like real protection, like you get more, if you died tomorrow, your daughter would get a bunch of Bitcoin. And so it's whole life because it lasts your whole life. And then it's limited pay. So you either can pay up front or you can pay in 10 equal installments. Let's say you're going to buy a 10 Bitcoin policy, you'd pay us 1 Bitcoin a year for 10 years.
Mm.
And the reason you do this is basically, okay. And then we promise you some amount. So let's say you put in 10, it depends how old you are and how healthy you are, but like to make the math simple, let's say we're going to promise you 20. You give us 10, we promise you 20. I'm sure you have a question about how we turn 10 to 20, but but to pause and get to your point of like why you do this, there are really three things you're getting. One is you get genuine protection, right? So from the moment you pay the first premium, if you died tomorrow, your daughter would get 20, even though you only put 1 in. Or you put 10 in and like you die the next day. Anyway, it's 20. So there's like real protection, mortality protection. The second thing is there's implicit savings, right? So we're turning 10 into 20. That's compounding over time. We're offering you a rate of return. And even if you thought you could get the exact same rate of return as we can, like you invested in our private credit fund, the insurance policy would be better because it's compounding tax-free. So like, the way the math works is like we're giving you a better return than you'd get if you were in the credit fund because of that tax-free compounding. And then the third is, and this is just true of all whole life, it just happens to be that our policy is denominated in Bitcoin. If you need liquidity, you can get liquidity out of the policy through what's called a policy loan. And the critical thing about that policy loan is it's tax-free. So imagine you put 10 Bitcoin in, the price of, I like to call it the exchange rate of Bitcoin, but I'll say price because some people think of it. The price of Bitcoin is now at 433,000. You could borrow a Bitcoin back from us, and it is like you're getting a new Bitcoin. So you could sell that Bitcoin, and you wouldn't owe capital gains tax between 43 and 433. And that's just a feature of the tax code and complying with the tax code. So back to your question of the hardware wallet, like we are doing everything that makes Bitcoiners uncomfortable. And I'm just very upfront about that. Like you send us our Bitcoin, other people send us their Bitcoin, we hypothecate it together with other people's Bitcoin, and we lend it in what I hope to convince you is a low risk, low yield, super conservative way to get a very low yield. And the reason we do that is so we can comply with the US tax code. Like there has to be a rate of return to be life insurance. But what you get out of that is it's an intergenerational wealth HODL product that offers you this protection and you have this tax-free liquidity. So what I would say, and what I pitch people on, is not like you have a hardware wallet with N number of tokens, send us all those tokens. Because you're taking counterparty risk. I mean, we're like, I obviously don't want to convince you that that's counterparty risk worth taking, but it is counterparty risk. So most of the people, our customers, they might have a 25 Bitcoin stack and they buy a 5 BTC policy. They have 1,000 Bitcoin stack and they buy, a 50 BTC policy. They have a 10 BTC stack. They buy a 1 BTC policy. They want to do more later. They want to re-up and buy a bigger policy as we prove ourselves over time. And we think that all makes sense. Honestly, that is also what I've done. I have put probably more than most. I put a large percentage of my Bitcoin into this company, and I think that it makes sense to do that. But I also have some like on a hardware wallet, metaphorically buried in my backyard.
So a question that a lot of people are going to want to ask: who's your custodian, and how are you securing these Bitcoins?
Yeah. So we use Anchorage, um, and we we take security super seriously. And um, you know what? I was about to describe a bunch of security procedures, but I'd say we use Anchorage and we're very careful. And um, we have a pretty large quorum, and we have an extraordinary large number of people need to approve to like withdraw any Bitcoin from Anchorage. So we can like move things around in Anchorage, like in payments operations with fewer people, but we have like extra security in place to make sure that we can't remove Bitcoin from Anchorage.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with the folks at Anchorage. I interviewed Diogo a few times, and they're certainly one of the trusted custodians. And you mentioned you guys are in Bermuda. You're licensed, and is this service available in the United States and internationally, or only in certain regions?
Without really boring everyone, what I'd say is we've designed our product to comply with US tax rules. We are well uh, positioned to do all our like KYC requirements and anti-money laundering requirements on US people. And the way it works is that folks in the United States can buy life insurance from whoever they want.
Mm.
So there's actually like a very fascinating Supreme Court decision from the 1890s, which is like a really the original Supreme Court decision on like freedom to transact. It's like really worth looking at, but it is all about how you can buy life insurance from wherever you want. And so actively market in the United States, like we're not putting up billboards or anything like that. But most of our users, they find us somehow. There's a lot of like word of mouth right now, or however they find us, and then they can come to our website and they can express interest in our product, and then we can interact with them and teach them about the product. As long as they've come to us and like we haven't cold called them and reached out to them. So that's how it works now. Our ultimate ambition is you know there are 57 countries in the world with inflation rates over 10%. We think that if you live in any one of those countries or live in any country where you have currency risk or regime risk or inflation risk, that buying a portion of your life insurance in this international offshore Bitcoin denominated policy makes a lot of sense. So our operational goal, back to like we comply with all these rules, is like we need to be able to do KYC, we need to be able to do anti-money laundering procedures, and we're bringing that on board, like, and we need to be able to medically underwrite people, and we're doing that like country by country. So we haven't yet. We sort of have a bunch of countries we're working on. I don't know what it'll exactly be next, but our ultimate ambition is not only like that you could buy the policy from anywhere in the world, that it would be to your benefit. Like we will design products that work for like local tax codes or local regulation everywhere in the world. And that also, right now we have a pretty big minimum on our product. So it's I'd say a few Bitcoin, even spread out over 10 years, that's like thousands of dollars in premium a year.
Mm.
My ultimate dream is that, maybe you have a product that you pay a thousandth of a Bitcoin for, a tenth of Bitcoin of coverage for 10-year term life or something. I made those numbers up, but the point is like we hope to get into smaller policies and as we expand geographically.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, it'd be ideal to have the fractionalization where, like you said, smaller size, maybe for folks in other countries who may not be able to hold a good amount of Bitcoin.
Exactly.
So yeah, that definitely makes
If I could do the math, I'd code everything in Satoshis, but I
sense.
can't. I can never keep track of it if it's 7 or 8 digits. Anyway.
Yeah. Um, Now there was news reported earlier this year of a $19 million funding round. Can you tell us about that? And also, is Sam Altman an investor? Hi, everyone. Pardon the interruption. I'm Tony Edward, the founder and host of the Thinking Crypto podcast. I have a huge favor to ask you. If you haven't subscribed as yet on YouTube or the podcast platforms, hit that subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button, hit the notification bell on the YouTube platform, and on Spotify or Apple or wherever you get your podcasts, please leave a 5-star rating and review. It supports the podcast. It allows me to bring great quality content to you. Thank you for your support, and I'll let you get back to the content.
Yeah, so we actually raised about $20 million to date now. So the funding announcement was for 19, but we raised another $1 million. And yeah, so the first round we raised, or the first like tranche of funding, Sam Altman co-led with Lockie Groom, who's actually like a really incredible solo capitalist. So it was Sam and Lockie, and then a whole bunch of like angels and CEO like Parker Conrad from Rippling, Dylan Field from Figma, crypto, Dan Ramiro and Mark Bagava, who were both Zach Abrams, all like former executives at Coinbase. So have a really good set of people there. And then our second tranche of capital, I really look out and say for our Series A, we really want like a real like crypto heavyweight firm. And fundamentally, I don't think I'm going to be able to make them experts on life insurance. So I wanted to go get some like life insurance expertise on the cap table so that folks know we're like doing the underwriting right and the actuarial math and stuff like that. So the second like set of funding was like MS&AD, which is Japanese life insurer, Hudson Structured Capital Management, which is this big like insurance, reinsurance, asset manager in New York, Northwestern Mutual, the biggest life insurer in the US, a bunch of folks like that. And then actually pretty late in that round, we had Gradient come in, which is Google's AI fund, and Stillmark, which is a Bitcoin only fund out of Los Angeles, which is run by this woman, Elise, truly amazing. So actually that round ended up being like quite nice in that we have like insurance people, crypto people, and tech people. So yeah, that's how we've raised the money.
So question for you, as the Bitcoin ecosystem grows and we get spot ETFs and these things around the corner and become Bitcoin's adoption becomes more prominent in society and more people start to trust the asset class. And through the S-curve adoption, we're seeing just Bitcoin and crypto everywhere. Let's say Coinbase comes knocking, or maybe one of the traditional life insurance companies say, hey, we want to acquire you. Are you open to that? Would you sell to Coinbase this time around?
Would I sell to Coinbase? I don't. I mean, it's easy to say, like, do I have the fortitude of Mark Zuckerberg to churn down $1 billion? I don't know. But I honestly, the reason we picked this idea from a sort of set of ideas wasn't just that we thought it was a good idea, but that it's quite deep. It keeps me very interested. And I think it keeps my co-founder and our team very interested. And it might sound boring to other people, but there are like endless, like the geographic expansion I talked about. There are all sorts of different products we want to bring to market. Sam and Gradient invested, like we do a lot of automation. We think that there's a lot of innovation to be had in underwriting, pulling apart different mortality risks, all sorts of things. So every day I wake up excited to run this company, and it's not just that I'm excited today to run this company, but I'm excited for the potential of this company over the next decades. And I really think all the way back to one of your earliest questions, when you're like, is it a Bitcoin only company or is it something more? I don't see those things in conflict. Like I I think one of the reasons Sam invested is like, I'm very clear that I think we can build the world's largest life insurance company.
Mm.
I think that we can reach, the biggest. Hang On, I think, is the largest company in customers right now. They have 250 million customers. I say I want to see if we can reach a billion people. Um, I think that how I think about carriers as traditional life insurers is as potential partners, particularly in countries where we're not experts. So if we wanted to go to India, I think the right way to do that is sort of like a joint venture with an existing Indian life insurance company where we're doing the Bitcoin or the crypto more generally. We're bringing the technology, but like maybe they're providing the balance sheet, the local regulatory expertise. And I say the same thing on Coinbase. If Brian's listening, I would love to bring a product to market. And maybe again, like a much smaller product, a term life product, and partner with someone like Coinbase. Because I think of these like the Coinbases of the world, like almost more like banks and TradFi.
Sure.
And banks and insurance companies have like 100 years of history where banks will cross sell or upsell or just like, they're facilitating the financial needs of their customers, and insurance is one of the things they do without them becoming an insurance company. I think that would be a big challenge.
Yeah, I think it'd be pretty cool product for Coinbase to integrate, and another option, another touch point for customers, and in their plan to expand. And I've seen them do that in the past with certain tax reporting. I think it was TaxBit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and integrating these different products. Now tell us about the Bitcoin private credit fund. That's the
Yeah.
latest news that broke. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we, as part of our insurance company, we are focused on getting like steady, low risk, low yielding returns in Bitcoin. Actually, a little less than we're promising in the private credit fund. So over the last 2 years, we've had our Bitcoin. We're now starting to have the Bitcoin of our customers who are paying premiums, and then we invest that into private credit. So what that means is, we're lending to some miners, we're lending to some market makers, and we're incredibly conservative, incredibly focused on credit risk. We have an investment committee, we have a board, we have a regulator. Like we've had to develop all of these procedures, processes, due diligence checklists, all of this stuff to run our insurance company and to really feel comfortable that if you bought a policy for your daughter, that we're getting the right risk return profile to like meet our policyholder obligations.
Mhm.
And the truth is, we built all that because there isn't long-term asset management in Bitcoin, right? A lot of the yield that exists in the world, it's very like overnight, or it's someone who wants to borrow to trade for a month. And we're really looking to do something different, which is to lend to institutions, and to try to push durations out. That is like lend for longer terms with credit-worthy counterparties. And yeah, I think we look back and, I look at BlockFi and Genesis and other people, and um, I think that they, one, they were building a, a term lending business on top of deposits, which essentially doesn't make sense if you're not a bank. And so that was one big failure. And the second is, I think they were just incredibly greedy. I mean,
Mhm.
I've interviewed tons and tons of people who work at those institutions now, and like they have stories about how, the credit team would bring a loan to the investment committee with, LTV to like loan to value of 30%. And the committee would like cross it out and put 75% because you make a bigger loan, you get bigger interest rate or interest payments, bigger interest payments or higher revenues, higher multiple, you can like go public faster. And we're just like built completely differently and really from the ground up to be, again, steady, conservative. So we realize that we're not the only people in the world who want returns in Bitcoin. Low risk, low yield, returns and are willing to trade off illiquidity, that is, it's like not available today, like for those steady conservative returns. So we figure since we need it, there are other people who we think are going to want it or need it. And that's why we launched the credit fund. It's really like built on that deep experience and extending that experience, as a product to other people. And we'll see if that theory is right. I think we believe it's part of the maturation that needs to exist in the space. And back to my idea of like Bitcoin land or crypto land, if that's real, if that's going to be a thing, then there needs to be like money, there needs to be movement, there needs to be capital markets, there needs to be a yield curve, there needs to be debt. And yeah, there have been some really bad actors in that space, but like fundamentally, if you believe that there should be a Bitcoin economy, I think you have to believe that there's going to be Bitcoin lending.
Mm. What do you think about the Bitcoin spot ETFs and, all Wall Street trying to get a share of that? And does that impact your business in any way? Are you looking to build anything around ETFs in the future?
Yeah. Look, I think that you're absolutely right that the ETF to us is a sign of like institutional interest, and we think it'll be a sign of a huge additional wave of interest in Bitcoin. And we'll actually just have to see how that retail interest plays out over the next 5 years. Like, I think it's going to be really obvious for a lot of people that they can now like put a portion of their portfolio into a Bitcoin ETF in their investment account or their retirement account. And what I hope is that some portion of those people like get a little curious and go one step deeper, I guess, to Coinbase, and then two steps deeper to having a hardware wallet. And I think that funnel of is something that we need to recognize as crypto people, that like there needs to be a range of ease of use or simplicity, and that we could also just see as like top of funnel into getting more people onboarded into this into crypto land. For us personally, or I guess institutionally, the thing that we are thinking a lot about is that there will be a way next year to hold Bitcoin in your retirement account or your investment account. But there is not going to be an easy way to hold Bitcoin in like your annuity or your existing life insurance product. So we have been working on like some product designs that either we could bring to market in the United States, or we could partner with someone to bring to market in the United States, that would look more like, I think life insurance agents are frequently positioning some of their products as like what you do after your 401k is maxed out, or what you do with a portion of your retirement savings, rather than just like having a brokerage account. And insofar as there'll be a huge conversation about how this Bitcoin ETF should be a part of your portfolio on that side, we are really well positioned to help life insurance agents think about how to tell that story on the annuity or insurance side. And it's actually a lot more complicated. And well, it's both simpler and complicated. It's simpler in that there's no SEC approval to seek to do that. Sure. It's more complicated in that like the mechanics are a little more complicated. But that's how we've been thinking about it. Like if and when that happens, that like we have a huge opportunity to, just as every RIA in America will probably be thinking about Bitcoin, what could we do to make it so also every life insurance agent in America is thinking about Bitcoin?
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And having gone through the process of having an investment advisor, as you become an adult and you have a family, and then getting life insurance and all these things, it's a natural evolution, right? And expanding and having all these products. And as Bitcoin, as we're talking about, Bitcoin becomes more prominent as an asset class, people are going to be diversifying to different products across the gambit of what they're used to, right? And having all these things in place. So it absolutely makes sense. With that said, the Bitcoin halving coming up next year, how are you guys preparing for that? Is there anything you have to do with regards to that, with the supply being cut, less Bitcoin, there's more demand in the market, maybe because of the ETFs? How are you preparing for that?
Yeah. I'd say we actually think about it a lot more on the credit side and the asset management side, because fundamentally what we try to do is keep everything in Bitcoin, right? So we lend someone 100 Bitcoin and we say, at the end of the year, give us 105 or we're going to lend you 100 Bitcoin, and then like every quarter, give us 1.25 Bitcoin for the next 8 quarters and then pay us back the principal. Like we're all in Bitcoin. So that's like part of our shtick. So when we're doing credit analysis on counterparties, we think really deeply about the halving and what that's going to mean for the business models of our counterparties and their ability to repay in Bitcoin. So that's where we like really see it. I think for our business, like the life insurance business, the fundamental truth is like it'll probably lead to the exchange rate of Bitcoin being higher. And our product is, it's better to get in the lower Bitcoin is, right? It's a weird counterintuitive effect with some of these things. Like the tax advantages are bigger if Bitcoin is worth less. But on the other hand, people feel poorer when Bitcoin is worth less, so they're less likely to invest in a tax advantage structure. But the truth of the matter is, like, any person who thinks that the halving is going to lead to the equilibrium price of Bitcoin being higher than it is now should come buy a life insurance policy before that happens. So that's not affecting my business right now, but like it is a practical reality that like it should be affecting my users. But I don't know. I haven't figured out how to communicate that, right? Like,
so with companies putting Bitcoin in their balance sheet, right? You got MicroStrategy, Tesla, and so forth. I think twofold question. Do you see that trend continuing? And does your service play a role in any way from an insurance standpoint? Obviously, we've been talking about life insurance and all those things, but what about companies who are holding Bitcoin? Is there a product that you're looking at to meet that demand?
yeah. Let me hit the second question first. So, like, 100%, there's this whole world of like key man insurance, company-owned life insurance called COLI. And we are thinking a lot about that. I think Keyman Insurance in particular, it's very like in line with the products we already have. And like the truth is every miner should buy Keyman Insurance on all of their executives in Bitcoin. So if one of their executives died, which would have potentially like real implications on their operations. And I would say the same for Block slash Square slash Jack Dorsey. I think that like insofar as they see Bitcoin as a huge part of their business, like they should buy Keyman Insurance or company-owned life insurance. Another thing that we've thought about, but like we just need to see the demand is like group life. So I don't know if you've ever like worked at a company and you're like signing up in payroll and they're like in the middle, they're like, oh, you get $100,000 in coverage. Yeah. Do you want to like buy more?
Right.
Well, we could do that all in Bitcoin, right? So, I think if you're, even if you're like Coinbase, who I think doesn't hold a ton of Bitcoin in their balance sheet, maybe the key man makes sense. Maybe the key man doesn't because they're not like necessarily long Bitcoin. I think it could be a great employee benefit to offer Bitcoin to all their folks. So all of those things are like on our roadmap. I think fundamentally, I like to joke that like I feel sometimes like I'm running a regulated entity first and like a product company second. So I think all of these things are obvious and they're actually wouldn't be that difficult for us, but they're like somewhat complicated. So like we have like years of work to do to like do the design, make sure we can like do the KYC AML, we can integrate with like a payroll system, we can like, but I think all of these things make a lot of sense. And as for um, companies having more Bitcoin on their balance sheet, what I hope to see is I think that'll continue. I think that there'll be more of it. Just as like the retail ETF to me suggests that people should have 1 or 2% or something of their portfolio, no matter their like ideological or whatever position I'm in Bitcoin. I think too that corporate treasuries, when it's easier, both from a operational standpoint, but particularly from an accounting standpoint, because the accounting is going to change soon, that corporate treasuries should put some money into Bitcoin. What I'd really like to see though is like more companies like us. And that is what I mean is that we do all of our financials in Bitcoin. So we like state our profits and losses in Bitcoin. We state our assets and liabilities in Bitcoin. And I think that is a real statement on the that we think there's going to be an economy in Bitcoin. And it's not easy to do. But I think that, I've joked that we should start a stock exchange, not like a crypto exchange, like a stock exchange where the bids in Bitcoin and then like Marathon and Riot and all the miners should go public on that stock exchange because it actually would make more sense. Like Marathon should be borrowing in Bitcoin, hopefully from me. I haven't talked to them, but like they should borrow in Bitcoin instead of denominating their debt in dollars because they have Bitcoin cash flows. And their stock price should be in Bitcoin because it is a claim on future cash flows denominated in Bitcoin. Now, anyway, whether that's realistic or not in the near term, like I think when you look again out 30, 40, 50 years, like we all have to decide how serious we are about whether this is like Bitcoin is part of a like global economy denominated in Bitcoin, or whether it's an asset that we just hold that happens to be worth more in dollars. And this is why if I had my say, we would stop again calling it the price of Bitcoin because I don't think it's a thing you buy in that sense. I think we should call it the Bitcoin dollar exchange rate, because I think Bitcoin should be thought of as a foreign currency or a currency, and we should be talking about like every time the BTC gets more expensive, I think we should really be saying is that the dollar is depreciating.
Are there plans to expand beyond Bitcoin to maybe new products around Ethereum and other altcoins, also stable coins, NFTs, and things like that?
Yeah. There's not a firm plan. I do think it would make sense for fundamentally, I think that Bitcoin, I'm going to offend everyone maybe by saying this. I think Bitcoin and ETH do different things and they have different purposes.
Yeah.
And for me, Bitcoin is very much a store of value.
Right.
And we've built a product that plays into it as like a store of value, intergenerational wealth, like hodling. That's the product we have now. I think if we built an ETH product, I think it would be less like ETH as a store of value. And there are other versions of insurance products that are more like investment accounts wrapped in insurance, where you like pick different strategies. So you can imagine something like that, where it's more like ETH as a window into DeFi through an insurance product.
Sure.
And I think that would make a lot of sense. And if we did that, it would be the same. We'd do the same structure. We'd create a new subsidiary. All the ins would be ETH, all the outs would be ETH. We'd state our financials in ETH. We'd like do our solvency calcs in ETH. We just do everything in ETH because then you're like the whole point of that is to avoid the currency risk.
Sure.
So I think that would make a lot of sense. Beyond that, I don't see any. I don't yet see another token where I would say I think it will have the durability. And and the persistency of those two. You know, I'm really fascinated from a like technology ecosystem culture perspective with Solana. But if you said like, should we denominate a 100-year institution in Solana, I'd say I don't think it's ready for that.
Sure.
Whereas I do think that that's true of Bitcoin and ETH. And I sort of say the same thing with stablecoins, to be honest. Like, I think that's a really interesting idea, and like we've batted it around. Um, but if you like really pressed me right now and said, do I think that Tether and Circle are going to be the century-long winners in that space? I'm not really prepared to say yes. And if that's true, then like it's not ready to have an insurance company um, denominated in that currency.
Sure. Um, let's talk about crypto at large, with the remaining time that we have. Uh, Crypto is on the rise. We're seeing it pop up everywhere now in society. Even in the recent GOP presidential debates, we got candidates on both sides of the aisle, Democrat and Republicans, who putting out their pro-crypto agenda. We're waiting for comprehensive regulations for crypto in the United States. There are a couple of bills in the House. Do you think 2024 we see some regulations, also crypto coming up in these presidential debates as well?
Yeah, I certainly think that it's rising in awareness, and I hope in more positive ways. You know, I think if we looked out over the last 2 years, uh, FTX, even Binance to a certain extent, you know, those like entered into the mainstream media, particularly FTX, right? Like
Oh,
we just, as like crypto folks, had to endure like every single day an article about the trial in the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, New
yeah.
York Times, Bloomberg, like every single day talking about this fraud. And when I look out over next, you know, we kept building. Like we again, we believe in the long term. So when I look at 2024, my hope is that the ETF again can be a part of a change in sentiment. Like you know, whether or not it's the ETF is you know more owned by TradFi institutions or you know it's against the grain or the ethos of like fundamentally what we want. I think the important thing is to think of it as the first step in what will be a multi-step journey of onboarding for larger and larger portions of the population. Now, there'll be a lot of people who just like put some Bitcoin in the ETF and forget about it.
Sure.
But I think there'll be some portion who like get curious and move to the next step and the next step and the next step. Um, so do I think it'll be a big political issue in 2024? You know, I don't know. I mean, there's two wars raging and a lot of other things to work, you know, a ballooning debt and all this stuff for people to worry about. But do I think that what we want to see, need to see, hope to see is a you know larger and larger constituency of Americans and globally who understand crypto on some level and have positive feelings toward it, not negative feelings. And I think that every year that goes by, um, no matter the cycles, I think in the long term, every year that goes by, I think we're going to see fewer Ponzi schemes, fewer frauds, and more legit businesses. That's what we're trying to build. That's what Coinbase is trying to build. That's what Anchorage is trying to build. And I think that those sentiments will really work.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a complete aside, actually, like I've been thinking about writing something about this, but like
Mm.
19th century life insurance was like crypto is now.
Mm.
Like there were Ponzi's, there was frauds, like all this BS retail stuff, like products that didn't make sense. Like people would sell you life insurance and like rug pull you. This was actually like, and now we look at life insurance 125, 150 years later as like boring, staid, and legitimate. And
Mm.
I think that it'll go faster. But I see the same thing in crypto. Like
Yeah.
there's a new financial innovation, lots of bad things happen. There are a lot of bad actors. But then like every year there's just a set of people who are like brick by brick, um, making it more legitimate, more durable.
Yeah, agreed. I think certainly there's going to be a maturation, right? And all these, like you said, bad actors fall into the wayside. And it has happened with many different technologies and innovations. Just bad actors come in and try to take advantage of people. But then the technology matures, becomes, there's greater, better financial products, kind of like what you guys are building. And like you said, it becomes boring because then it's out
Yeah,
of it becomes like full mainstream adoption. Everybody's like, okay, yeah, great. Okay, I have it in my ETF. I have the insurance, whatever. Move on with life. So,
exactly, exactly.
yeah. All right. I got some wrap up questions here for you. First is if you could create your own metaverse, what would the theme be?
My own metaverse.
If you put on the
Um,
Oculus and go to Zuckerberg's metaverse.
yeah, I think like you, all of my personal life that isn't building this company is wrapped up in having a 5-year-old and a 2-year-old. So what came to mind are like metaverses that would be really like interesting for them. But I guess like those will be built, right? Like
Yeah.
the thing my son would absolutely love is like Legoverse. I'm sure they're working on it.
Oh, sure.
So I'm not sure I have something like uh completely new. Yeah, I'll go with Legoverse. Make my son happy.
For sure. Okay. Rapid fire questions. Favorite food?
Chicken Parmesan.
Favorite musician or band?
Um, I'm really weird. I'm a big classical music person. I'm gonna go with Brahms.
Favorite movie?
Barry Lyndon.
I don't think I've heard of that. Um,
It's a Kubrick film. It's a very pretentious choice, but it actually is my favorite movie. I used to say it used to be Godfather, but then like anyway,
I
like
got
after 2001, before Full Metal Jacket, sort of saying.
uh I love Kubrick films like Full Metal Jacket, like the 2001 Space Odyssey and so
Yeah,
forth. But I don't I've never heard of that one, so I gotta check that out. Um,
yeah.
favorite book?
So many. Favorite book. I don't know. The book I've probably read the most is like every like 2 years I reread Lord of the Rings, something about the language. Um, the last book I read was High Output Management for like the fifth time because I actually am managing people. But like that's a weird one to call your favorite book.
No, like it's funny because along kind of along your journey, as I started managing people, I read like Emotional Intelligence and one and two, and they're part of like my top
Yeah,
favorite books, right? But it's like not a book you want to read, like pick up, oh, I'm gonna go read. But it
yeah.
you
Yeah.
learn, I learned a lot from it, It's like uh
Yeah.
yeah. And when you're not working,
I'm just I'm reading the new Charlie Munger's Almanac from Strike Press, which I also recommend.
oh, I gotta check that out. And when you're not working, what are you doing for fun as a hobby?
Oh, raising the kids. No, uh I I I used to run a lot. Now I go on like long walks, I'd say. Um and yeah, so running, raising the kids, sleeping,
Yeah, well, I can relate.
the big ones.
Zac, pleasure chatting with you. Really excited to see future updates around Meanwhile and all the great products you're building around Bitcoin. Thank you so much for joining me.
Great. Thanks for having me.